You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Locked On Seahawks. My name is Rob Rang, and I'll be taking over as lead host for today's show with our normal captain, Corbin Smith, taking a well-deserved Labor Day weekend off before the NFL's regular season officially kicks off just 6 days from now. My co-host today, of course, is the one and only Nick Lee, and we've got a jam-packed show for you today. For all of you fantasy football enthusiasts out there, Nick and I are going to be giving the latest, greatest intel on what to expect out of the Seahawks skill position players with realistic ADPs and projected stats. And we're going to take a closer look at whether the Seahawks should have gone all in on Micah Parsons or perhaps make a different move before hosting the San Francisco 49ers next Sunday at Lumen Field. But first, Nick, we've got to discuss head coach Mike Macdonald's announcing yesterday that Seattle's starting offensive line against Nick Bosa and those 49ers will, in fact, have Jalen Sundell at center and Anthony Bradford at right guard. And, Nick, as you know, their top competition, Olu Oluwatimi, Christian Haynes, both dealt with injuries this summer, and so many have presumed that Sundell and Bradford would be the starters. But it's not like the Seahawks didn't have options here. You know, Dalton Risner, of course, just signed with the Bengals. McDonald acknowledged that Olu Oluwatimi is healthy and ready to go. And Josh Jones has shown the ability to play guard as well, the veteran. So here's my question, Nick, to start off the show. And thank you so much for all of our listeners and viewers, and you, Nick, as well, very much so. Here's my question. Is this the starting five that you think gives Seattle its best chance at beating the 49ers in week one?
Well, if we're talking about the five possible offensive linemen that are currently on the Seahawks roster, yes, I do think so. Now, that's a two-sided thing, of course, because do I think this is a good offensive line? That is a different question, and especially circling center and right guard. And I've seen all the memes with regarding the right guard spot with, the clown lining up with all the soldiers ready to burst in the door like this is Anthony Bradford with the rest of the offensive line, or, the fierce-looking dragons looking over at the dopey-faced dragon. And you've seen all that, of course. And I have serious questions about right guard. I do. I've called him in the past half a guard because he can be a mauler in the run game. And I think that's where probably he won out and really separated himself in the run blocking. But if you look in the 83 guards last year that had at least 20% of snaps, he ranked 73rd in pass blocking and 78th overall in Pro Football Focus grade. He was literally one of the worst guards in football last year. Yeah. And the only one worse in some categories was Laumea. So not some great options for the Seahawks at guard. So serious question marks there. And it might have turned into like a lesser of two evils kind of scenario with Anthony Bradford. I am really hoping that I look really stupid in a couple months and that Bradford's playing well. I am less, nervous or less. I have less questions about Jalen Sundell. I think that he acquitted himself well in spots and playing time last year and in the preseason. This year, I think he's been one of the more pleasant surprises. He was the 7th highest graded center in Pro Football Focus for this preseason. And I was actually looking, I was like, when was the last time the Seahawks had a center get a 75 or better PFF grade in the regular season? You had to go back to Justin Britt's first year in 2017 was the last time the Seahawks had a center earn at least a 75 Pro Football Focus grade in the regular season. So if Jalen Sundell can make that translate, that would be he could be a lot of the first since Justin Britt's category, which is a decent starting point for Jalen Sundell. So those two obviously are the two biggest question marks. And then just going down the list, I have high expectations for Charles Cross. I think that John Benson and that crew can get him because if you look at the numbers, he has incremental improvements every year. And if he does even that kind of same progression this year, we're flirting with Pro Bowl territory at that point.
I agree.
I think it's fair in year 4, a top 10 tackle who's getting better every year. I think it's fair to expect Pro Bowl level play at this point. And I have high hopes for him. And then Gray Zabel, I think he's maybe already the most athletic lineman the Seahawks have. And he acquitted himself well in the preseason, crushed the pre-draft and draft process, preseason process. And he was actually, I know it's a really small sample size, minimum 30 snaps, the 7th highest graded guard in the preseason for Pro Football Focus. So, so far, so good there. I think that's all you can say. And then lastly, Abe Lucas, I'm just so happy, first of all. I'm so happy for him that he's healthy. He's looking great. And not only that, I was playing with some Pro Football Focus. You can tell I was playing with Pro Football Focus before this. And I stumbled upon, he was the highest graded tackle, period, left or right, in the preseason, minimum of 30 snaps. So, yes, small sample size. But it looks very, very good in the preseason. And not just Pro Football Focus. I mean, the coaches have been praising him. He's feeling good. Really high hopes for Abe Lucas this year. So overall, I think if this offensive line can stay healthy, and that's a big if, I think the Kool-Aid man is going to break through my wall and make me drink that Kool-Aid, because I am pretty bullish on the unit itself. There are huge question marks in the interior, or at least on the right side. But I do think that, I mean, really, we can both agree this unit only has to be average at best. Like, they don't have to be this elite Eagles line for the Seahawks to have a good season. Just be average, which the Seahawks haven't ranked above 25th in offensive line since 2020. So I think this is a good start, but still some questions remain as usual.
Yeah, I love the way you say it. They're just average. I mean, this is a team that's going to be in the postseason, of course. They won 10 games and were 3-3 against the division a year ago. And obviously the offensive line play was putrid at times. So if they are just average, then yeah, I think that they have to greatly surpass the, expected win total of some of those national pundits out there of 8.5 wins and, taking a step back. It's one of the biggest reasons why, Nick, I'm bullish on Seattle's postseason chances here. Just did a show with the Seahawks squad guys last night and we did the same thing with Corbin a couple of weeks ago, where basically we went through every single game, and I had the Seahawks at 13-4, and that's not trying to wear like the Kool-Aid man analogy that you gave before, or the Mama Blue kind of shaded sunglasses that I like to refer to of just that, that everything is going to be wonderful. Go Seahawks, fanboy style. I just think that the talent is there. I think that the coaching talent is there, and I love the fact that, as you said, you're just so excited for Abe Lucas specifically. I love that we're talking about Abe Lucas as the 5th guy of the offensive line, because it almost feels like the warm and fuzzy kind of storyline to it. It's like that's what you want to, that you're wrapping the present and that's tying the bow, kind of a thing. Just because we all know that how Abe Lucas has struggled with durability, but when he's on the field, that he is clearly a difference maker with the PFF numbers that you cited. An obvious indicator of that. I agree with you, though. Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, the tackle positions, as much as I think that the interior play is important, to me, those are two of the most valuable players on this team without any question. If either one of them is off the field, like the way that Abe Lucas was this last season, then I think you can go from that 13-4 kind of crazy upside type of a season to 7-10, in the snap of a finger or the snap of a bone, I guess I should say. So I do love the upside of this group. I share some of your concerns as far as the interior of the offensive line. I wanted to kind of go back to what head coach Mike McDowell had to say. I mean, and specifically use his words here when talking about Jalen Sundell over Olu Oluwatimi. This is what Mike McDowell said. Quote, it's tricky when asked about choosing Jalen Sundell over Olu Oluwatimi. Quote, it's tricky because Olu was having a heck of a camp, probably playing the best football of his career before he got hurt, and Jalen just took advantage of the opportunity. They were still competing at that time. We felt the way that Jalen played against Kansas City, and that's in week 2, not in week 3 of the preseason, notably, but we felt that the way that Jalen Sundell played against Kansas City really put him in a premium position to ultimately start the season at center. That's why we made a decision. Now, you mentioned again that Olu Oluwatimi was playing really good football, and I personally think that Olu Oluwatimi has, is a safer play at the center position, especially against a team with the physicality that San Francisco has. But at the same time, Jalen Sundell's athleticism. Coach McDowell mentioned Kansas City specifically. I rewatched that tape, and it was fantastic. Like you mentioned with Abe Lucas, the highest graded tackle for anybody in all of the league. over the preseason. Jalen Sundell was fantastic against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, it was at home. It was against Kansas City's backups, but the way that he climbed to the second level to seal off some of those blocks and create those rushing opportunities, he didn't allow a single hurry or quarterback pressure in preseason. There was one where it was a twist against the Raiders where Gray Zabel actually got beat a little bit, and it wound up making it look like Sundell was the one who got beat. But still, that's kind of stuff that's, that was the preseason opener. I just think that Sundell does give the team a lot of athletic ability. It's going to fit in very nicely with the wide zone running game. And then just having two young quality centers, as you said, Nick, it's been forever, a decade almost before this, or since the Seahawks have had any kind of quality play at center. I think that they now have two quality centers. And Anthony Bradford quickly, I just think that, again, you can see the potential with him. This is still a very young player who I think is still just scratching the surface of his potential. If he can just eliminate some of the helter skelter plays, the up and down, and just kind of iron things out, I really do think that Seattle does have the makings of one of the better offensive line, not just average, as you said, and I argue would get them into the playoffs, but being one of the 10 best in the league, and therefore being a real contender out of the NFC West. Is there anything else as far as the Seattle's offensive line, Nick, that you wanted to talk about before we switch gears and have some other conversations here?
Just again, the starting five, I think with the athleticism that it can play with this new scheme with Kubiak, does play well. I do think it's a little bit of a house of cards with the depth. Yep. You mentioned with Olu Oluwatimi, I think that there is something there, so I'm not ready to give up on Olu. But this is a scenario which is true for most teams. If we experience injuries along the offensive line, it could go south, like you said, in a real hurry. But the starting five, I'm starting to sip the Kool-Aid a little bit. We'll see.
Hey, Seahawk fans, are you still paying full price for gas? Stop leaving money behind and get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. Use my limited time promo code TOUCHDOWN and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You could make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas you already needed. At first, I thought it was too good to be true, but it's totally legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commutes, and you can too. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Don't let this offer drive on by. Download the free Upside app now using my limited time promo code TOUCHDOWN for a limited time 25-cent per gallon bonus. That's promo code TOUCHDOWN. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle between the login screens, the prices jumping at the checkout. It can be incredibly frustrating. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives you the advantage and gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. I pulled up Game Time, and in just a couple taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite NFL games as low as $100, and the app makes it super simple. I can even see the exact view from my seat before buying. And honestly, it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today.
Well, switching gears here, because again, I think that that it's easy to start to sip the Kool-Aid, as you said, with the offensive line. If that is the case, if this is a team that is built to do great things, then maybe the Seahawks should have been more in play with the big trade for Micah Parsons. Now, in case you've been living under a rock for the past 24 hours, you know that the Green Bay Packers took this massive swing, trading 2 first-round picks, traded a former team captain and Kenny Clark to the Dallas Cowboys for Micah Parsons. So this is the first time, of course, Nick, you and I have had a chance to talk about this since the big trade. First, do you think this is the type of move that you can justify from Green Bay's perspective? Does this legitimately put them in the Super Bowl conversation? And if so, do you think the Seahawks should have been the team to spend big on Parsons?
Well, to answer your first question, yes, because Green Bay you always need the head coach and the quarterback right to win the Super Bowl. And I think the Packers do have the quarterback and the head coach in LaFleur and Jordan Love. And this, speaking from a Seahawks point, this really sucks because, short of him coming into the NFC West, this was probably the worst case scenario. It's a team that you're probably going to be competing for at least a wild card spot in that loaded division, the NFC North. So all of a sudden, a team that, hopefully the Seahawks can compete for the NFC West title, but if they don't get there and they're left with the wild card, the NFC North is going to have at least one, maybe two wild card teams. And you all of a sudden have to deal with a team that just got Micah Parsons. And then even if that, this is way down the line, but facing them in the playoffs, perhaps. So an NFC fellow contender getting him is a bad thing for the Seahawks. And I do think 2 first rounders and let's say a Boye Mafe.
Yeah.
I would have signed up for that 100%. In fact, some of the trades I was kind of mocking it before had 2 firsts, another pick, and then Boye Mafe. So I do think the Packers got a little bit, almost not steal is not the right word, but I think it was a fair compensation and optimal compensation for Micah Parsons, clearly the best or one of the 2 best pass rushers in football. And it kind of hurts me because sure, anyone can Madden force trade Micah Parsons and make their defense look fun. But with the Seahawks, specifically with Mike McDonald, that defense, his scheme, the talent already on the defense, putting Micah Parsons on that defense would have easily pole vaulted the Seahawks to a top 3, maybe number 1 defense in the NFL. And then if your offense can be average, competent, you have a playoff team. You have a team that is feeling good about maybe their NFC West contention level. So yeah, from that point, it hurts because yes, Seahawks could have had him. That compensation, I think, was within reach for the Seahawks. And 2, that he goes to a team that I think is probably going to be standing in your way if you have any hopes of contending this year or in the near future in the Packers. I think the Packers, they have been a problem for decades in the NFC, and I think that's going to continue with that head coach, quarterback, and now Micah Parsons for the next handful of years. So, yes, the Seahawks should have and could have made this move.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I really I like how you articulated about Micah Parsons and just the fact that other than another team in the NFC West, that this may have been the scariest team for Micah Parsons to go to because, his statistics are obviously very impressive on their own, but it's when he gets sacks, when he gets the pressures. This is a guy that can change a game. He's one of those players that when it is the fourth quarter and you need that big pressure, everybody's going to look to him, and he has shown the ability to kind of step up in those types of situations. He can be a finisher, and I think that the great teams, the ones that do host the Lombardi at the end of it all, have to have those signature kind of players. And so I applaud the Green Bay Packers for getting for having the courage just to go for it in the first place. I 100% agree with you as far as what they gave up to get him. It doesn't feel like they gave up quite as much as I think a lot of us were expecting. I also think, though, to be fair, the financial risk of this is so large, and the Dallas Cowboys, I think, acknowledge that they weren't likely to get the 3 first-round picks or the multiple first-round picks and then a really good young player like a Boye Mafe here. I wonder how much of the salary cap ramifications of the highest paid player in NFL history, who's a non-quarterback, and bringing him into a locker room. And this is a guy who opted out during COVID, and everybody had their own reasons for that, but he opted out in that final season at Penn State. There were some questions about, his ability to kind of, be a good teammate. DeMarcus Lawrence is basically, Seahawks' own player, of course, has suggested as much with Micah Parsons publicly. And I wonder if Adam Durde felt that strongly about Micah Parsons, if he might have just been, like that Kool-Aid man we were talking about, crashing through John Schneider's door and be like, hey, we need this player on our team. The fact that Seattle didn't do that, I think is interesting. Corbin, of course, has been talking a lot about Jadeveon Clowney. I'm curious your thoughts on the possibility of Clowney and his fit here, or maybe a Christian Wilkins, the talented defensive tackle that Pete Carroll, cut bait on with Las Vegas Raiders, or if there's anybody else out there that you think that that the Seahawks should be interested in, whether it be somebody who was just released by an NFL team during cuts, or a street free agent, or anybody else that you think the Seahawks should be considering before the season kicks off a week and a half from now?
Yeah, well, the Seahawks have about $24 million in cap space. And yes, you're right. Acquiring a Micah Parsons would basically, you'd have to kind of string out your whole financial situation and make sure everything is on the up and up, because that's quite a financial investment. I get that part of maybe the apprehension. But I love the quote. I think it was Jerry Jones. Like, yeah, we'll use these picks. We'll get Pro Bowlers. We'll trade for good players. You just had a really good player, and you just traded him away. So that logic doesn't quite fly with me. But as far as people who, again, the Seahawks didn't need Micah Parsons and had to throw in all their chips, and they're screwed if they don't. That's not quite the situation, because the Seahawks have a good enough defense where if they can get a complementary piece, a depth piece. Jadeveon Clowney, I think, is a great. I'm shocked it hasn't happened already, with how he had that break, something of a breakout or renaissance season with the Ravens a couple seasons ago under Mike McDonald. It's been talked about ad nauseum on this show and many others around Seattle. It just makes a lot of sense. It almost makes too much sense where maybe they won't do it. I don't know. There's some reason why it hasn't happened yet. Another one I want to kind of put my radar on too. Maybe, I don't know if the fit is quite as perfect as maybe Clowney, is Darius Smith, the pass rusher out of Detroit and Green Bay. 9 sacks last year, has had a really productive career, and I still think he's got some juice left in the tank. And again, they just signed DeMarcus Lawrence. I get that. The Seahawks have met their quota for aging edge rushers, I guess. But just adding to the depth, especially with Uchenna Nwosu, who is healthy, or at least appears to be getting there, really encouraging. It's going to be hard to shake the injury-prone tag. And as long as he has that tag, I do think the Seahawks should look at depth options. You could do a lot worse than Zadarius Smith to be thrown in that list of your edge rusher. So Clowney makes a ton of sense. Smith makes a ton of sense. And I was looking at who's available maybe along the offensive line and the interior. Not a lot there. That is there's a lake down in San Diego where I grew up. There's a lake. I could always tell if times are good, if there's a certain level to the water. With the lake, we got a lot of rain. The drought's over. Lake's looking good. There's boats out there. Drought. Oh, I'm seeing some plants poke up. The water's kind of down. That is bone dry with the interior offensive line free agent right now. Kenyon Green maybe, but even the Eagles said they couldn't fix him, so that's probably a red flag. Not a lot of options there. So I think if the Seahawks are set on perhaps adding from the free agent market that's currently there, Clowney still, after all this, I think makes the most sense.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you on this point either. I think that Seattle could use another pass rusher. And so whether it be a Clowney, whether, there's a number of guys out there in terms of pass rushers that I think are intriguing. Inside linebacker is still a position of concern for me as well. We talked about, obviously the Seahawks brought in Chad Surratt. You brought in Chris Paul Jr. And brought him onto the practice squad. You brought back Patrick O'Connell, a little bit of a surprise release, but again, brought back on the practice squad. So maybe inside linebacker isn't as big of a concern. Notably, along with the offensive line conversation that we just had, Mike McDonald did mention that Tyrese Knight was out there practicing yesterday for the Seahawks on Thursday. So again, very encouraging signs here. But at the same time, there's an inside linebacker, Dallas Gant from Philadelphia. Interestingly enough, you cited the Eagles there, talking about offensive linemen, that I think would make some sense as well. So to me, there's some bodies out there at different positions. To me, I keep mentioning inside linebacker because it's kind of like running back. It's just such a position of attrition. Guys break down. The Seahawks, of course, have 3 running backs on their practice squad, and the Damian Martinez, Jacardia, right, Anthony Tyus. But they only have the one inside linebacker. And so whether they bring back Tupatala from UW or they bring in a guy like a Dallas Gant, I think the inside linebacker to me still makes some sense, just knowing the way that Mike McDonald likes to mix and match his inside linebackers. Again, Seahawks fans can about the players that John Schneider might want to add to the Seahawks roster, but we promise to give our thoughts on Kenneth Walker III, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and the rest of Seattle's top fantasy football prospects.
This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason has already wrapped up. College football getting ready to kick off as well. Whether you've got your eye on big name quarterbacks or breakout running backs, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in the game, including their weekly flyer. For this weekend, Prize Picks is offering major max discounts, including the Dak Prescott max discount for Thursday, September 4th against the Philadelphia Eagles at 0.5 passing yards. Prize Picks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player staff projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. I've used Prize Picks for a few seasons now, and I love how simple it is. I can get a lineup in before my coffee finishes brewing, and the flex play option is a total game changer. Even when one of your picks misses, you still doubled in money. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, run your game.
In today's show. So let's get to it. In the fantasy football drafts that I've done, sir, recently, K9 and JSN have come off the board within a few picks of each other. So I'm just curious, who would you take first between Jackson Smith and Jigba and Kenneth Walker III, and why?
That's a good question, because typically my philosophy is, the running back depth tends to run out before receiver depth. Obviously,
Agreed.
There's more receivers on the field naturally, so there's more chances for them to provide fantasy value. I just did a draft last night, and I found myself I lost out on JSN, but I found myself pausing before drafting Kenneth Walker in the third round. I think it was like late third round, because his ADP right now is 42, so it's like right after, so it's early fifth round, late fourth round. And looking at the ADP being average draft position, by the way, I should probably clarify. And looking at who is next to Ken Walker, James Conner of Arizona, and he has proven to be more healthy. He's got less competition. So if you're one of those that are maybe choosing between the two, sorry, but James Conner makes a bit more sense fantasy-wise. JSN, I would pick first between, if presented, hey, I got to fill a wide receiver spot and a running back spot. JSN makes a lot of sense. I do, because JSN is at 28 ADP right now. So basically it's like the middle or latter half of your second wide receiver slot if you're a 10 to 12 league team or 10 to 12 team league. And I think that's about right for him. If you're drafting JSN to be your WR1 right off the bat, I think you're going to be disappointed. Not because JSN is not a great receiver. In fact, I still think overall ability, talent-wise, he can be a top 10 receiver. But fantasy, what do we need? You need volume. You need targets. You need all that stuff. And I think with this offense, I think it's going to be hard for him to equal his 137 targets from last year. He got a ton of targets last year. And even now, as he's WR1 in Seattle, there's more attention being paid to him. He doesn't have Metcalf and Lockett distracting other parts of the defense. So they'll be keying a bit more on him, and also just the natural consequences of the offense. I think he's going to struggle to get that kind of volume. So I would pick JSN first between the two, but I certainly wouldn't feel great if I am sitting there in my lineup and Jackson Smith and Jigba is my overall number one wide receiver. I think that would be, if he's a WR2 or even flex, if you can get him as a flex, oh my gosh, yeah, you're sitting pretty. But relying on him to be a heavy target, heavy yardage kind of one, like a CD Lamb or a Justin Jefferson, that you're going to be disappointed. So Ken Walker, also just kind of going off a tangent a little bit. I even found myself, do I draft Ken Walker III slightly lower than his ADP, or do I take Zach Charbonnet a little higher than his ADP? And that is something I've started to explore, because if you look at fantasy points per game last year, Ken Walker was at about 12.2, and Zach Charbonnet, yes, smaller sample size, not as many starts, 15 fantasy points per game. Yeah. So on a per game basis, Zach Charbonnet was more fantasy productive. But of course, the grand question is, can Ken Walker stay healthy, and what will be the kind of the timeshare?
Yeah, I love the way that you just explained that, because you kind of took the words right out of my mouth there. I mean, like I think that I've heard some fantasy football, experts out there, prognosticators, say that ask the question: is Zach Charbonnet this year's most important handcuff? And I think it's more than that. I think that is Zach Charbonnet the eventual starter for the Seahawks? Because for all the reasons that you just said, I mean, you use the fantasy football numbers. I'll use some real football numbers here. I mean, Zach Charbonnet and he only started 6 games last year. He had a 909 all-purpose yards and 9 touchdowns. That's more than Kenneth Walker III, who started 11 games. He had 872 all-purpose yards and 8 touchdowns. So again, I think that that you make an excellent point here. That Zach Charbonnet, it does feel like a true rotation rather than a 1-2. The way that maybe some of the other backfields, you mentioned James Conner, for example. I mean, Trey Benson might get himself some playing time, but at the same time, it's very clear that James Conner is the number one in Arizona. That obviously Christian McCaffrey is the number one in San Francisco. That Kyron Williams, with all due respect to Blake Corum, is still clearly the number one. I don't know that's going to be quite as cut and dry in Seattle, and I think that actually can be a good thing for the Seahawks. It can be a little bit of a death knell, I think, for fantasy football players out there. So I do think that if you're going to go with Ken Walker III in that 3rd, 4th round, if you can get him in the 5th round, to me, that's still just so much upside that is justified. But I agree with you. I think that is one of the real internal debates that Seahawk fans who happen to play fantasy football are struggling with right now, is how high do you take K9? And should you be considering waiting off on K9 and taking a little bit more dependable Zach Charbonnet, maybe 2 rounds later? So, kind of a fascinating topic there. I mentioned that we were going to be throwing out some numbers. I'm going to just kind of give you my quick predictions here on K9. I think that we all can agree that he has the highest floor, the highest ceiling, but also could have the lowest floor just because of the durability points. I think it's interesting that his scrimmage yards the last 3 years in a row, Nick, have all dropped. I mean, 1,215 all-purpose yards as a rookie, dropped to 1,164 2 years ago, dropped to 872 yards. So again, you're dropping by 40% over the last couple of seasons. So definitely some risk here. But my prediction for him is I think that we are going to be talking about a guy that does see 1,100 to 1,200 all-purpose yards, 8 to 10 touchdowns. To me, that is a safe prediction for him. I can see a scenario where he pops off for 2,000 all-purpose yards, he's get 16 touchdowns or something of that nature. I just think that, again, the durability and Zach Charbonnet's talent behind him probably caps that. And with JSN, I think you make some excellent points. I do think that his route savviness is going to allow him to push for that 100-catch type of a season he had last year. But at the same time, I don't see that breakaway element. So I think that he's going to be similar to what we saw a year ago. Last year, he caught 100 balls for 1,130 yards and 6 touchdowns. I think that people might be surprised. Only 6 touchdowns. I don't think that he necessarily is going to double that the way that some prognosticators are out there. I think that he's going to get to maybe 100 catches. I think he might get to 1,250, 1,300 receiving yards, a little bit more big play element to his game. But I think you're still capped at like that, 6, 7, 8, 9 kind of a touchdown threshold, which I agree with you. It makes you wide receiver, a WR2, rather than somebody you want go up against a Justin Jefferson, or somebody like that. And part of the reason why is it's going to lead us to our next question with Cooper Kupp here for just a moment. We all know that he struggled with durability. We all know, obviously, that the offense, at least the passing game, is very likely to funnel through JSN, the emerging talent, rather than Cooper Kupp, this, descending, perhaps, veteran, but clearly a veteran here. So, at what point in the draft, what round, what ADP are you thinking that it's worth the gamble of a Cooper Kupp, knowing that he does have a little bit of a timeshare? And again, the durability issues are a problem.
Yeah, and then first let me be clear with Ken Walker. If he's healthy, he's like a lower level RB1. Like he has that kind of ceiling. He can be your RB1 if he's healthy. That's just a big if. Cooper Kupp, sure. Gone are the days I took him in the first round just a couple seasons ago.
Me too.
And he was a perennial first round fantasy guy for a long time. Gone are those days. And heck, I think if you even are drafting him right now, intending on him being your starting flex, that might be a stretch. Now, again, with all these guys, this does not mean that they're not valuable. It's just relative to their draft position. Like you said, if Ken Walker falls to the fifth, snag him immediately. Or if Cooper Kupp, looking at his ADP, he's around guys like Matthew Golden, the rookie from the Packers, and Stephon Diggs in New England. I would probably go with those two guys first. If we're just looking at guys hovering around the same draft position at wide receiver, he would be a really solid bench option, especially as injuries pile up. You got bye weeks to worry about. Last year, he still had 6 games of double-digit fantasy points.
Yep.
And he even had a 22.6 point effort in November last year against the Patriots. So It's in there. Of course, different offense, different quarterback, all that stuff. I would see him if he's there. If I'm still looking at a couple more bench options and wide receiver, I'm in a 12-team league, 9th, 10th round. If he's still sitting there, yeah, that would be a really nice bench option. I would not overreach for him just because, again, he's second option in Seattle, and we're already talking about maybe JSN struggling to get as many targets. So I think that will be even more true with Cooper Kupp. But again, there is some value depending on where he falls in the draft. He's got that ability. So yeah, Cooper Kupp in the 9th round or so as a bench option. If you're drafting him hoping that he becomes one of your 3-4 guys to flex or be a receiver, I think you'd be disappointed. But certainly as a guy that, because heaven forbid JSN go down, he's your one. And he, like you said, with route savviness, Cooper Kupp's got that in spades too. He could rack up some fantasy points in a hurry. So certainly a draftable guy, but be cautious.
Sorry if I lost you for a moment there. Well, again, when it comes to Cooper Kupp, what I see is a guy who I think is going to be a specialist in the red zone and on third down. And I think that you're going to see I think that he might lead the Seahawks in third down conversions. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he leads the Seahawks in receiving touchdowns. It's one of the reasons why I have, the kind of the touchdowns for Jackson Smith and Jigba a little bit capped. I would be surprised if he gets over 10. Cooper Kupp, for all of his durability issues, Nick, and we all cite them. I mean, he's been it's been frustrating, as you said. You and I have each drafted him ourselves. He's scored at least 5 touchdowns the last 4 years in a row. So again, even when he is dinged up, when he's on the field, he is still incredibly productive because of that route savviness, because quarterbacks trust him, and he's almost impossible to cover in the red zone. And I think that is something that Sam Darnold is going to take full advantage of. And so I would not be surprised at all to see Cooper Kupp again challenging JSN to be the leading touchdown catcher for the Seahawks in 2025. Finally, last question here from me to you, real quick on Seattle's fantasy football guys. Look, I think you can make an argument that we should be talking about Sam Darnold, that we should be talking about Elijah Arroyo, we should be talking about AJ Barner or Torrey Horton or the Seahawks defense or Jason Myers. Is there any one of those or any other Seahawks that you are just not leaving your personal fantasy football draft without investing a late round pick on that particular player or unit?
I did find it interesting that even though he's the returning incumbent tight end guy, Arroyo has been outdrafted Barner. I mean, sure, the skill set is different. To answer your question, no. Either tight end, I think, unless you're in a 12-team league that has multiple, like a tight end and a flex where it's your tight end 2 or even 2 flexes, then yes, maybe stash Arroyo in there because there could be some. It's one of those things where he maybe doesn't see a lot in the start of the year. Then as the season progresses, you start to see Arroyo kind of get comfortable in the offense and the relationship with him and Darnold, sure. But again, don't be relying on any Seahawks tight ends to really carry anything on your team. And even Sam Darnold, if you're playing a 10 to 12 team league, 1 quarterback, no super flex, which means you wouldn't you wouldn't have 2 quarterbacks in play. You only have 1. Don't draft Sam Darnold. Just don't. Now, if you are in a super flex league or a 2 quarterback league where all of a sudden the league itself needs 20 to 24 quarterbacks in play on the lineup, yes, I think that he can be. Basically, at that point, are you asking, can Sam Darnold be a top 24 fantasy quarterback, which I do believe he can be. since he was, far above that last year. And I think that we're going to get something in the middle this year. So yes, don't draft him if it's a one quarterback league, but if you have to have two quarterbacks in your starting lineup, Sam Darnold's worth a flyer there. And then lastly for me on the defense, I'm a big, don't draft the defense ahead of the last couple rounds. But interestingly, the Seahawks right now are projected to be 14 in fantasy defense, which I left scratching my head because last year they were the fourth. They finished fourth last year in fantasy points as a defense, given their strength of schedule or lack thereof, and plus another year with Mike McDonald, more talent in there. Guys are getting more mature and flourishing in the defense. This could be a top 5 fantasy defense again. So don't be afraid in the last couple rounds. Don't do it in the 7th round, please. But last couple rounds, if the Seahawks defense is still there in the last couple rounds or the second to last round, snag the Seahawks defense. You won't be sorry.
I 100% agree with you on that point, Nick. I think that, you don't want to be the first team to take a defense. But once you start seeing the Philadelphia Eagles, the Pittsburgh Steelers, or now the Green Bay Packers coming off the board, I think you should feel confident that you can take Seattle and likely get some big plays, not just the shutout type of performances, but some pick sixes. Who knows if you'll see another Leonard Williams 92-yard fumble return touchdown, or interception return touchdown. But still, the point being just some really big plays. I think that you're going to see more impressive, more consistent defense, especially at home this year. And the fact is that you're going up against some very young quarterbacks. You're going to be playing against Cam Ward. You're going to be playing against Michael Parsons. With all due respect to the guys from the state of Washington, I'm very excited for them. They're still young quarterbacks, and so I do think that Seattle's defense, for my money, if you are going to be targeting a member of the Seahawks outside of the primary skill position stars that we talked about earlier, if you're going to be looking for somebody in the late rounds, the Seahawks defense to me is the one that has the upside to potentially win your league. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Locked On Seahawks. I want to take a moment to thank my co-host Nick Lee for his time, and to thank each and every one of our viewers and listeners for joining us today. The next time we'll be seeing you, it will be game week. Let that sink in, folks. It's going to be a great season. See ya.